The bite that changed everything. Ethan sat in the busy food court of Nova Prime Space Station, enjoying his favorite dessert, a chocolate lava cake. It was warm, soft, and melted in his mouth with every bite. After months of space travel, this small pleasure reminded him of home. The station was crowded with beings from different planets, each busy with their own lives. Humans were still a new species in the galactic community, but Ethan had grown used to the strange sights and smells around him. He picked up his fork to take another bite when, suddenly, a hand reached out and grabbed a piece of his cake. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. Sitting across from him was a girl, not human. She had smooth silver-blue skin, glowing violet eyes, and long dark hair tied behind her ears. Her fingers were slender, and her nails shimmered like tiny crystals. She wore a sleek black uniform with glowing symbols on the sleeves. Before Ethan could react, she popped the piece of cake into her mouth. For a moment, everything was silent. Then her body shuddered. Her pupils dilated. A soft glow spread across her skin. Her breath became uneven. She gripped the edge of the table as if trying to steady herself. Ethan leaned forward, confused. Are you okay?" She looked at him, her violet eyes wide with something between shock and hunger. What is this?" she whispered. Ethan blinked. It's chocolate lava cake." She gasped. "I have never." She stopped mid-sentence, as if struggling to find words. "This taste, this feeling, She suddenly grabbed his wrist. Her touch was ice-cold, but her body was burning up. Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. Was she allergic? Was she sick? Had he just accidentally poisoned an alien girl? Before he could ask, a loud alarm blared through the food court. A deep robotic voice echoed through the station speakers. "Attention. Unauthorized Azari detected. Secure the area." Ethan turned to see several armored soldiers pushing through the crowd. Their uniforms were black with glowing blue emblems, the symbol of the Azari High Order. The girl's grip on his wrist tightened. "They're looking for me," she whispered. Ethan frowned. "Wait, what? Why?" She shook her head, her breathing still uneven. "No time to explain. We need to leave. Now." Before Ethan could protest, she yanked him out of his chair. They ran. The food court exploded into chaos as the soldiers shouted commands, pushing past tables and aliens to chase them. Ethan barely had time to grab his bag as they dodged through the crowd. "Who are you?" he gasped as they sprinted through a narrow hallway. "My name is Sarah," she said, glancing back. "And you just got yourself into a lot of trouble." Ethan groaned. "All because you stole my dessert." Sarah's eyes flashed. "You don't understand. That dessert, it changed everything." The chase. They turned a corner and skidded into a maintenance tunnel. The air smelled of metal and oil. The walls were lined with glowing pipes, humming with energy. Ethan's heart pounded. "Where are we going?" Sarah didn't answer. She tapped a small device on her wrist. A holographic map flickered to life. Before she could find a route, the soldiers appeared at the tunnel entrance. "There. Stop them." The soldiers raised plasma rifles. Sarah grabbed Ethan and jumped, just as the air behind them exploded with energy bolts. They tumbled into an open vent shaft, sliding down a steep metal tube. Ethan barely had time to scream before they crashed onto a lower level. Ethan groaned, rolling onto his back. His body ached. Sarah got up instantly, eyes scanning their surroundings. "We need to keep moving." Ethan sat up, rubbing his head. "Okay, seriously, what the hell is going on?" Sarah hesitated. Then she took a deep breath. "I am Azari," she said. "My people do not eat sweets. We do not feel pleasure from food. It is forbidden." Ethan frowned. "Forbidden? Why?" She clenched her fists. "Long ago, my species was different. We used to feel emotions like humans, but our rulers erased those emotions. They made us logical, controlled, emotionless. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, are you saying that my chocolate cake just unlocked your emotions? Sarah nodded slowly. I felt something I was never supposed to feel. Ethan exhaled. Oh, well, that's crazy. Sarah suddenly stiffened. Her eyes flickered to something behind him. Ethan turned, just in time to see a black drone hovering toward them. The drone's red lights flashed, scanning them. A robotic voice spoke. Target acquired, alerting Azeri High Order. Sarah grabbed Ethan's hand. We have to run. Again. Ethan groaned. I really hate today. And with that, they took off into the dark tunnels of Nova Prime, with the entire Azeri army hunting them down. The taste of forbidden desire. The tunnels of Nova Prime space station were dark and winding, filled with the low hum of energy conduits and the occasional burst of steam from unseen pipes. Ethan could barely keep up as Sarah pulled him through the maze-like corridors, her grip tight around his wrist. His lungs burned, his heart pounded, and his mind was spinning with a million questions. Behind them, the faint hum of tracking drones echoed through the tunnels. The Azeri weren't giving up. We can't outrun them forever, Ethan gasped, his boots skidding on the metal floor as they turned another corner. We don't have to, Sarah said, her voice urgent, but strangely excited. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Excited? You're enjoying this. Sarah looked at him, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim tunnel light. I don't know what's happening to me, but my heart is racing. I feel. She hesitated, touching her chest as if experiencing something completely new. I feel alive. Ethan groaned. That's called adrenaline. Humans get it when we're about to die. Sarah didn't seem to hear him. She let out a short laugh, a sound filled with something almost joyful. It was as if her body was waking up from a deep slumber, and every sensation, fear, excitement, thrill, was brand new. Ethan grabbed her shoulders. Sarah, focus. Where are we going? She blinked, shaking her head as if clearing her thoughts. I know a place, an old maintenance bay. If we can reach it, we can hide. A distant metallic clanking echoed through the tunnels. Footsteps. The Azeri soldiers were getting closer. Then let's move, Ethan said, pushing her forward. A moment of silence. The maintenance bay was abandoned, cold, quiet, and hidden beneath the station's main power grid. Sarah sealed the heavy door behind them, her fingers gliding over the control panel. The lock clicked, and for the first time since Ethan's dessert was stolen, they had a moment of silence. Ethan collapsed against a crate, running a hand through his messy brown hair. His heart was still pounding, his shirt damp with sweat. All right, he breathed. Now talk. Sarah stood near a dim light strip on the wall, her body still glowing faintly from whatever effect the chocolate had on her. She looked at Ethan, then down at her own hands, as if she couldn't recognize them. This is impossible, she murmured. I was taught that emotions were nothing but distractions. That we, Azari, had evolved beyond them. And yet, she looked up, her glowing violet eyes locking onto his. I feel everything. Ethan rubbed his forehead. So what, your people don't feel anything at all? No happiness, no love, no cravings for dessert. Sarah shook her head. The High Order controls everything. Our food, our thoughts, our emotions. Pleasure is considered a weakness. Food is meant only for survival. Ethan stared at her. That's messed up. Sarah took a slow breath. When I bit into your dessert, something changed. My body, my mind. I can't stop thinking about it. And she hesitated. I want more. Ethan blinked. More. She stepped closer. More of the dessert. More of the feeling. More of. Her voice faltered, and she bit her lip. I don't even have words for it. Ethan swallowed. Sarah, are you high on sugar? She frowned. What is high? Ethan laughed, shaking his head. Forget it. Look, we need to figure out what's going on with you, and how to get the Azeri off our backs." Sarah turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "They'll never stop hunting me now." Ethan studied her. She was different now. Her posture looser, her expression more open. It was as if she was no longer bound by invisible chains. She wasn't just running for her life. She was running toward something she didn't even understand. And somehow, it all started with one bite of chocolate. The Azeri's secret. Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something, Ethan." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, great. More shocking revelations." She ignored his sarcasm. "There are others like me. Azeri who are different. They hide among the stars, waiting for a chance to be free." Ethan sat up straighter. "You mean there's a resistance?" She nodded. "But they are weak. Scattered. Most don't even know what they're fighting for. They only know they don't want to live under the High Order's rule." Ethan leaned back, thinking. "And you think this little sugar discovery of yours is the key?" Sarah met his gaze, her voice firm. "Yes, the High Order erased our desires. But what if we could bring them back? What if my people could taste what I tasted, feel what I felt?" Ethan smirked. "So, what? You want to start a sugar-fueled revolution?" Sarah's eyes gleamed. "Why not?" For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Ethan laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "This is insane." Sarah tilted her head. "Do you like insane?" He sighed. "Not when it puts a giant target on my back." She stepped closer, her expression softening. "Ethan, I don't know what's happening to me. But I know one thing. I can't do this alone." He looked at her, this alien girl whose entire world had been shattered by a single bite of human dessert. He had two choices: walk away and let her figure this out on her own, or stay and change the fate of an entire species. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right. You've officially dragged me into your crazy mess. What's the plan?" Sarah smiled, a real, genuine smile. The first one she had probably ever made in her life. "We find the others," she said, "and we wake them up." Ethan exhaled. "You better hope I packed enough chocolate." The great escape. The maintenance bay was silent, but Ethan knew the quiet wouldn't last. The Azeri High Order wouldn't stop until they found Sarah, and by extension, him. He leaned against a rusted metal crate, arms crossed, as Sarah paced in front of him. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, her body still trembling from the lingering effects of the chocolate lava cake. "We can't stay here," Ethan said. "They're already hunting us, and I'm guessing these emotion police of yours aren't exactly the forgiving type." Sarah nodded. "If they catch us, they won't just imprison me. They will erase me." Ethan frowned. "Erase." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "The High Order does not allow corruption to spread. They will strip my mind of every new feeling, every emotion I've gained. I will be turned into a hollow shell, obedient, logical, empty." She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will not be me anymore." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Mind-wiping. Forced emotional suppression. This was worse than he thought. "All right," he said. "Then we're getting off this station. But how?" Sarah's fingers moved to the glowing panel on her wrist. A small holographic map of Nova Prime flickered to life. She pointed to a docking bay deep within the station's lower sectors. "There is a freighter leaving for the outer colonies in 1 hour. If we can sneak aboard, we'll be out of the High Order's reach, for now." Ethan studied the map. Security. Sarah exhaled. Heavy. The Azeri control the station's core sectors, and all exits are monitored. She looked up at him. "But I know a way." Ethan gave her a skeptical look. "Does it involve getting shot?" She smirked. "Not if we're fast." Ethan sighed. "That's not very comforting." A sudden, sharp beeping interrupted them. Sarah's eyes snapped to her wrist device. Her location had been compromised. "Warning. Unauthorized activity detected." Security forces deployed. Ethan swore. They found us. Before they could react, a loud metallic clang echoed through the corridor outside. The overhead lights flickered as the maintenance bay's entrance door began to unlock. Sarah grabbed Ethan's hand. Run. A race through the underbelly. They bolted through a side exit just as the heavy door behind them hissed open. The station's underbelly was a twisting maze of forgotten passageways, rusted ventilation shafts, and power conduits pulsing with raw energy. The perfect place to disappear, if you knew where you were going. Sarah led the way, her movements swift and precise. Ethan followed, trying not to trip over the mess of cables and loose metal plates beneath their feet. Behind them, the Azeri security drones buzzed to life, their mechanical voices cold and emotionless. Target detected. Engage pursuit. Plasma bolts whizzed past Ethan's head, searing into the walls. Sparks rained down as Sarah yanked him around a corner. "Tell me you've got a plan," he yelled. "There's an old transit tunnel ahead," she called back. "If we can get to it, we'll reach the docks." Ethan glanced behind them. The drones were closing in fast. No way we're outrunning them. Sarah gritted her teeth. Then we don't outrun them. We outsmart them. She suddenly veered left, dragging Ethan toward a dark, half-collapsed maintenance shaft. Ethan skidded to a stop. "Wait, this thing looks like it hasn't been used in 100 years. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rusted metal beam, yanked it loose, and sent it crashing into the tunnel behind them. The passage trembled, then collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. Ethan coughed, waving the dust from his face. "Okay, that was actually kind of brilliant." Sarah smirked. "Told you." They hurried through the abandoned shaft, their footsteps echoing. Ethan's heart pounded as they neared the freighter docks. A taste of freedom. The docking bay was massive, lined with towering cargo containers and starships preparing for departure. The smell of fuel and metal filled the air, and the soft hum of engines vibrated beneath Ethan's feet. Sarah pointed to a gray freighter at the far end of the bay. "That's our way out." Ethan studied the ship. It was an old merchant vessel, nothing fancy, but perfect for sneaking away unnoticed. He turned to Sarah. "All right, how do we get on board?" Sarah's gaze flickered toward a group of dock workers loading cargo. "We blend in." Ethan frowned. "You do realize you're a glowing blue alien, right?" She smirked. "Not if I do this." She reached into a nearby crate and pulled out a dark cloak, wrapping it around herself. The glow from her skin dimmed beneath the fabric. Ethan grinned. "All right, that might actually work." They slipped into the loading zone, walking with purpose. The dock workers barely paid them any attention, too focused on their tasks. As they neared the ship, Ethan let out a slow breath. They were almost there. Then, a cold voice rang out from behind them. "Halt." Ethan froze. A tall figure in sleek black armor stood at the edge of the loading bay, his glowing blue eyes locked onto them. Sarah stiffened beside him. Ethan whispered, "Friend of yours." Sarah's voice was tight. "That's Commander Varric, the High Order's enforcer." The air grew heavy. The dock workers scattered, sensing the tension. Varric stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Sarah. "You have disobeyed the will of the High Order. You will come with me." Sarah took a slow breath. "No." Varric tilted his head slightly. "You misunderstand. That was not a request." The air crackled with tension. Ethan tensed, ready to fight, but Sarah suddenly stepped forward. She pulled something from her cloak, a small vial. Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, is that?" Sarah smiled. "A gift." She tossed the vial toward Varric. He instinctively caught it, frowning as he examined the dark liquid inside. Then he uncorked it and took a sip. The change was instant. Varric staggered, his body twitching. His eyes widened in shock as his fingers trembled. He let out a sharp breath, his lips parting as something foreign and forbidden crashed through his mind. Emotion. Feeling. The cold logic of the high order cracked. Varric gasped, looking at Sarah with something other than authority. With understanding. Sarah stepped forward, her voice soft. It's called coffee. Varric didn't speak, but he didn't stop them either. Ethan and Sarah seized the moment. They ran for the freighter, slipping into the cargo hold just as the doors sealed behind them. The engines roared to life. The ship lifted off. And just like that, they were free. The secrets of the Azari. The freighter rumbled as it slipped into hyperspace, leaving Nova Prime Station behind. The stars outside the small cargo window stretched into infinity, a swirling tunnel of light that signified one thing. For now, they were safe. Ethan exhaled and leaned against a stack of supply crates. Feeling the tension in his muscles slowly ease, he glanced at Sarah, who sat across from him on a metal bench. Her cloak was pulled back, revealing her silver-blue skin, her violet eyes still glowing faintly. But there was something different about her now. She wasn't trembling from fear anymore. Instead, there was a spark in her expression, something that hadn't been there before. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. All right, we made it. Now, can we finally talk about what the hell is going on? Sarah turned her gaze toward him, thoughtful. You already know the basics. The high order controls my people. They have suppressed our emotions for centuries. Ethan crossed his arms. Yeah, and apparently chocolate is some kind of awakening drug for you. Sarah smirked. Not just chocolate. Any kind of intense flavor, any pleasure, any joy. Ethan frowned. So, your entire species has been living without emotions. Forever. Sarah's gaze darkened. Not forever. Only for the last 1,000 years. Ethan sat up straighter. Wait, you're saying your people used to have emotions. What happened? Sarah hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. The High Order wasn't always in power. Once the Azari were creators, explorers, dreamers, much like humans. Our civilization thrived on art, music, love, and discovery. She closed her eyes briefly, as if remembering something distant and painful. But then came the great collapse. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds bad. Sarah nodded. It was. Our people were on the verge of destruction. Wars, famine, chaos. The High Order rose from the ashes, promising peace, but their peace came at a price. She met Ethan's gaze. They decided that emotions were the cause of our suffering. That passion led to war, that desire led to greed. And so, they created a society based on pure logic. No hunger, no love, no dreams, only order. Ethan let out a low whistle. Damn. And your people just went along with it. Sarah clenched her fists. Not everyone. There were those who resisted, but the High Order was ruthless. They erased memories, altered minds, reprogrammed entire generations. Over time, our history was rewritten. Ethan exhaled. And now, no one even remembers what it was like to feel. Sarah nodded. Until now. Silence filled the cargo hold. The only sound was the low hum of the freighter's engines. Ethan studied her for a long moment. She had risked everything, her home, her safety, her entire existence, because of a single bite of dessert. And now she was talking about reversing an entire civilization's way of life. It was insane. It was impossible. And yet, all right, Ethan said, rubbing his temples. Let's say we want to wake up the rest of your people. How do we do that? Sarah's eyes glimmered. We find the resistance. The hidden rebels. Ethan sat up. Hold on, there's an actual resistance. Sarah nodded. They are scattered across the stars. Most of them are weak, hiding in the shadows. They don't even know what they're truly fighting for. Ethan frowned. And you think sugar is the answer? Sarah smirked. I think pleasure is the answer. My people need to feel again, to remember what was taken from them. Ethan leaned back against the crate, thinking. And where do we find these rebels? Sarah tapped a sequence on her wrist device. A holographic map flickered to life, showing a desolate planet on the edge of the Azari-controlled territories. "This is Velos 9, she said. "A wasteland. No major settlements. No resources. But deep underground, the Resistance hides." Ethan studied the map. "And they'll help us." Sarah's expression darkened. "They don't trust outsiders. But if I can show them what I felt, if I can prove that emotions can return, they will listen." Ethan sighed. "So let me get this straight. We're going to a secret rebel base filled with paranoid outlaws to convince them that eating cake will save their species." Sarah smirked. "Pretty much." Ethan shook his head with a chuckle. "Yeah, this is definitely the craziest thing I've ever done." Sarah's smile faded slightly. "There's something else you need to know." Ethan's amusement vanished. "What?" Sarah's voice was serious. "Commander Varric, the High Order's enforcer." Ethan tensed. "The guy we just tricked with coffee?" Sarah nodded. "He tasted it. He felt something. That means he won't stop until he understands it." Ethan frowned. "And that's bad because—" Sarah's expression was grim. "Because he will want more. And if he learns the truth, he will either join us," she exhaled, "or he will destroy us." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Great. So now we have an emotionally confused, coffee-addicted super soldier hunting us." Sarah's lips twitched. "That's one way to put it." Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. "All right. First stop, Velos 9. Let's find your rebels and hope they don't kill us." Sarah nodded. "And then?" Ethan grinned. "Then we start a revolution. The forbidden hunger." The freighter rattled as it dropped out of hyperspace, the swirling tunnel of stars shrinking back into the cold darkness of space. Ahead, the desolate world of Velos 9 loomed, a rocky, dust-covered wasteland, barely illuminated by the distant twin suns. Ethan stared at the planet from the cargo bay window. "So, this is where your great rebellion hides. Doesn't exactly scream revolution to me." Sarah, seated across from him, adjusted the cloak draped over her shoulders. "That's the point. The High Order doesn't waste resources scanning dead planets. The Resistance survives because no one thinks there's anything here worth saving." Ethan exhaled. "Guess that includes you." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She stared at the planet, her fingers tracing the edge of her cloak. "Until a few days ago, I would have agreed." Ethan gave her a long look. The changes in her were becoming more obvious. She was no longer the rigid, emotionless Azari he had first met. Now, there was something restless about her. Something hungry. Not just for food or sugar, but for feeling. For more. And that was what worried him. The ship's intercom crackled, and the captain's rough voice came through. "We're entering Velos 9's atmosphere. If you've got a death wish, now's the time to act on it." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Friendly guy." Sarah stood. Time to go. Landing on Velos 9. The freighter touched down with a rough, shuddering jolt, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Ethan coughed as he stepped off the ship, boots sinking slightly into the gray sand. The landscape stretched endlessly, nothing but jagged cliffs and shifting dunes beneath a sky of dull red clouds. Ethan frowned. "You sure anyone actually lives here?" Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she tapped a small, circular device on her wrist. A faint hum filled the air. Then the ground rumbled. Ethan tensed as the sand beneath his feet shifted, and suddenly a hidden metal hatch slid open just a few meters ahead, revealing a dark tunnel leading underground. "Right," Ethan muttered. "Secret base. Should have guessed." Sarah stepped forward without hesitation. Ethan sighed and followed. The underground city. The tunnels twisted and wound deep into the planet's crust, eventually opening into something Ethan never expected. A massive underground city. The cavern stretched for miles, filled with makeshift homes carved into the rocky walls. Dim blue bioluminescent lights flickered along the edges, casting everything in a ghostly glow. In the distance, Ethan could see dozens, maybe hundreds, of Azari. They weren't like Sarah. These Azari looked hardened, weary, distant. Their faces were hollow, their eyes dull. "Welcome to the last remnants of my people's free will," Sarah murmured. Ethan whistled low. "Somehow, this is even sadder than I imagined." Sarah led him deeper into the city. As they walked, more Azari took notice. Whispers followed them. "An outsider. What is she doing here? She's one of them. Why did they let her in?" Ethan shot Sarah a look. Not exactly a warm welcome. Sarah's jaw tightened. "They see me as an enemy. Someone who was made to obey." Ethan frowned. "Then why do you think they'll listen to you?" Before she could answer, a voice boomed through the cavern. "They won't." Ethan turned as a figure stepped out from the shadows. He was Azari, but older, taller, battle-worn. His violet eyes weren't dull like the others, but sharp and calculating. A jagged scar ran down the side of his face, disappearing beneath the high collar of his tattered black coat. Sarah exhaled. "Ethan, this is Varen, leader of the resistance." Varen's eyes swept over them, stopping on Ethan. "And you are not Azari." Ethan shrugged. "Good observation." Varen's gaze shifted to Sarah. "You shouldn't be here. You are a product of the High Order, a weapon built by our oppressors." Sarah's expression didn't waver. "I am more than what they made me." Varen's lips curled in something close to a sneer. "You expect me to believe that?" Sarah stepped forward, pulling something from her cloak. A small, wrapped package. Ethan blinked. "Wait, is that?" Sarah unwrapped it. A tiny piece of chocolate sat in her palm, shimmering under the dim light. Gasps rippled through the gathered rebels. Some flinched away as if she were holding a weapon. Varen narrowed his eyes. "What is this?" Sarah's fingers trembled slightly. A memory. A taste of something long lost. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan could see it. The fear, the confusion, the temptation. One of the younger rebels, a girl barely older than Sarah, stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto the chocolate with something close to desperation. "Does it really make you feel?" she whispered. Sarah met her gaze. "Yes." The girl's fingers twitched. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out. But before she could take it, Varen slammed a hand against the table. "Enough." The sound echoed through the cavern. Varen's voice was low, dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you are playing with?" He took a slow step forward. "You think pleasure is freedom. That emotions will make us strong. No, child. Emotions make us weak." Sarah didn't flinch. "Then why are you afraid of them?" Varen froze. Ethan watched as something dark and conflicted passed across the older Azari's face. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Varen reached for the chocolate. He picked up the tiny piece and held it between his fingers, staring at it as if it were something alien. Then, with deliberate precision, he crushed it. The room gasped. Sarah's breath hitched, but she didn't move. Varen's voice was cold. "Leave this place, before you poison more minds." Sarah clenched her fists. "You can try to stop me, but the truth is already spreading. The High Order cannot suppress it forever." Varen's expression remained unreadable. "We shall see." Ethan sighed. "Well, that went great." Sarah exhaled. "We're not done." Ethan frowned. "What now?" She turned, eyes burning with determination. "We find those who still want to feel. And we give them a choice." Ethan smirked. "So basically, we start a black market for emotions." Sarah grinned. "Exactly. War of desires." The air in the underground city of Velos 9 was heavy with silence. The taste of rejection still lingered in the room, more bitter than anything Sarah had ever known. Varen, the hardened leader of the resistance, had crushed the small piece of chocolate before anyone could taste it. a powerful symbolic rejection, a warning. Ethan leaned against the cavern wall, watching as the rebels dispersed into the shadows, their gazes filled with fear and curiosity. Sarah stood still, her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "That could have gone worse," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Sarah shot him a look. He smirked. "I mean, they could have shot us." She sighed, turning toward the dimly lit tunnels. "They're afraid, Ethan. Fear is the only thing the High Order left them with." Ethan crossed his arms. "So what's the plan? Because it sure looks like your people aren't ready to join the Great Desert Rebellion." Sarah's lips twitched at his sarcasm, but her violet eyes remained serious. "Varen is stubborn. He believes emotions make us weak. If I challenge him openly, he'll never listen." Ethan frowned. "Then what do we do?" She turned, walking deeper into the tunnels. "We don't ask them to listen. We show them why they should." Ethan followed, intrigued. "And how do we do that?" Sarah glanced at him over her shoulder, a glimmer of mischief in her expression. "We start a black market for pleasure. The Underground Awakening." The next few days were a blur of whispers, secrecy, and quiet rebellion. Sarah and Ethan worked from the shadows, seeking out Azeri who were willing to take a risk, the ones whose curiosity outweighed their fear. It started with one, a young Azeri girl named Rena, barely in her early 20s, who had been watching them from the moment they arrived. She had been the first to reach for the chocolate before Varen crushed it. When Sarah found her in the tunnels, Rena was hesitant. You said it makes you feel?" Rena asked, voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded and held out a small wrapped package. "Taste and decide for yourself." Rena hesitated for only a moment before taking it. The effect was instant. The moment the chocolate melted on her tongue, her body shuddered. Her violet eyes widened as she gasped. She clutched her chest. What is this?" Sarah smiled. "It's joy." Rena looked at her in shock. Then she laughed. A small, disbelieving laugh. The first real laugh she had ever known. That night, word spread through the underground city like wildfire. The first taste of rebellion had begun. The forbidden feast. Ethan and Sarah expanded quickly. They found others. Rebels who had secret doubts, workers who longed for something more, older Azeri who remembered the faintest echoes of what life used to be. One by one, they took the first bite. And one by one, they changed. The dullness in their eyes began to fade. Their movements became less mechanical, more expressive. Whispers of excitement replaced the fear in their voices. The resistance had started as a movement of survival. Now, it was becoming something more, a movement of awakening. But not everyone was pleased. Varen's warning. Late one evening, as Ethan and Sarah were preparing their next secret gathering, Varen appeared. His towering figure blocked the tunnel entrance, his violet eyes burning with fury. "You are playing with fire," he said, his voice dangerously low. Sarah met his gaze, unshaken. "No. I'm playing with freedom." Varen stepped forward. "You think you are helping them. You are only making them weak." Ethan scoffed. "Weak? They look more alive than ever." Varen's glare snapped to him. "You don't understand, human. Our world was once built on passion and feeling, and it nearly destroyed us. The High Order saved our species by removing our flaws." Sarah's fists clenched. "They didn't save us. They took everything from us." Varen studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. There was something else in his eyes. Not just anger, not just fear. Curiosity. He glanced at the small box of wrapped chocolates on the table behind them. Ethan noticed. His smirk returned. "You want to try it, don't you?" Varen's jaw tightened. Before he could finish, a loud alarm blared through the tunnels. Sarah's eyes snapped toward the sound. "No." Then a voice echoed through the underground city. "Resistance members of Velos 9. You are harboring criminals. Surrender them, and no harm will come to you." Ethan's stomach dropped. That voice. Sarah's breath hitched. Commander Varric. The High Order arrives. The underground city erupted into chaos. Rebels scrambled, some reaching for weapons, others frozen in place. The tension in the air thickened. Ethan grabbed Sarah's arm. We need to move. Now. But Varen didn't move. Instead, his fists clenched at his sides. His entire body was rigid, as if caught between two forces. The man who had spent his entire life resisting change was now staring down the reality of it. Sarah turned to him. Help us. Varen's violet eyes burned with conflict. Then, finally, he exhaled and reached for a weapon. The battle begins. The first explosion rocked the cavern. The ceiling shook as Azeri soldiers in sleek black armor stormed the tunnels, plasma weapons glowing in the dim light. The resistance fought back. Blasters fired. Energy shields hummed to life. The tunnels became a battleground of flashing lights and running figures. Ethan ducked behind a cargo crate, firing back at the advancing soldiers. Tell me we have a way out of here. Sarah dodged a plasma bolt, her movements faster, sharper than before. There's an old escape tunnel near the storage bay, but it's on the other side of the battlefield. Ethan swore. Of course it is. Varen barked orders to his people, leading the charge against the soldiers. Ethan turned to Sarah. You think he actually believes in us now? Sarah's lips curled into a grin. I think he's tasted a different kind of hunger. Ethan smirked. Told you emotions weren't so bad. She grabbed his hand. Come on. We have a war to win. A sweet new beginning. The underground city of Velos 9 was on fire. Blaster fire lit up the cavern, sending flashes of blue and red across the rocky walls. Smoke filled the air, mingling with the metallic scent of plasma burns. Azeri rebels fought desperately against the relentless forces of the High Order, who pushed forward in their sleek black armor, their faces emotionless. Commander Varric stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching the chaos unfold. His glowing blue eyes, once filled with cold certainty, now held something else. Something dangerous. Something human. The small vial of coffee extract Sarah had given him on Nova Prime was still in his pocket. He had only taken a sip. And yet that single taste had unlocked something. A hunger. A craving. Not for food, but for feeling. And it terrified him. Escape through the chaos. Sarah and Ethan ran through the crumbling city, dodging energy blasts as they pushed toward the storage bay. Rebels fought all around them, some falling, some rising stronger than before. Ethan fired back at the advancing soldiers, ducking behind a broken cargo crate. This was supposed to be a quiet revolution, remember? He yelled over the chaos. Sarah grinned despite the danger. No revolution is quiet, Ethan. A group of Azeri emerged from the shadows, weapons raised, not soldiers, but newly awakened rebels. Their eyes glowed brighter than before. Sarah's plan had worked. The forbidden hunger was spreading. Varen appeared beside them, firing relentlessly at the advancing soldiers. His face was tense, his battle-worn armor scarred, but his eyes held a fire that hadn't been there before. You're both insane, he muttered between shots. Ethan smirked. And yet, here you are. Varen cursed under his breath. We need to reach the tunnel before we're overrun. Sarah nodded. There's one problem. Varen arched an eyebrow. Only one. She pointed toward the far end of the cavern. Varric was blocking their only escape. Ethan groaned. Of course he is. The commander of the High Order stood like a statue, his face unreadable, watching as the resistance collapsed and rebirthed itself before his eyes. His grip on his weapon tightened. He should end this. He should destroy them all. And yet, he hesitated. The sensation inside him, the creeping, uncontrollable wave of feeling, had only grown stronger since he tasted the coffee. For the first time in his life, he did not know what to do. Sarah saw his hesitation. She took a slow step forward, ignoring the chaos around them. You feel it, don't you? she called out. Varric's fingers twitched around his weapon. The confusion, she continued. The hunger. The craving for something more. His glowing eyes flickered. This is corruption. Sarah shook her head. This is freedom. Varric's breath hitched, a small human thing that should never have happened. Ethan leaned toward Sarah. I'm all for emotional breakthroughs, but we're about to get shot. Sarah ignored him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny wrapped cube. Sugar. Pure, raw, unfiltered sweetness. Varric's pupils dilated. The war raged around them. Rebels screamed. Soldiers fell. The city collapsed. And yet, in that moment, only the two of them existed. Sarah unwrapped the sugar cube. Slowly, deliberately. Then, she held it out. A choice. For a long, breathless second, Varric did not move. Then, with a flicker of movement so fast that Ethan almost missed it, Varric took the sugar. He popped it into his mouth. And for the first time in his entire life, the enforcer of the High Order felt. His eyes widened. His breath caught. His entire body shuddered as flavor, warmth, sensation, emotion rushed through him like an uncontainable storm. He let out a ragged breath. His pulse raced. And then he laughed. A low, broken, disbelieving laugh. The battlefield froze. The High Order soldiers, still locked in battle, turned in shock at the sound. Their perfect leader had just laughed. A sound none of them had ever heard before. A sound that should not exist. Varric slowly looked up at Sarah, something unreadable in his expression. Then he dropped his weapon. The High Order soldiers gasped. And then, one by one, they dropped their weapons too. The war ended in silence. The dawn of a new era. The battle was over. The resistance had won. Or rather, they had changed the rules of the game. Velos 9 was no longer just a hidden rebel base. It had become the first true Azeri city to feel in 1,000 years. Some rebels cried. Others laughed. Some simply stood in awe, experiencing their emotions for the first time. Varen stood beside Ethan, shaking his head in disbelief. I have fought for decades, he murmured. And you two idiots solved it with dessert. Ethan smirked. Hey, never underestimate the power of good food. Varen chuckled. I still don't trust you. Ethan shrugged. I don't trust me either. Sarah, standing among her people, smiled. She had done it. The Azeri were awake. The High Order's grip had shattered. And there was no going back. Varric, now standing among the rebels, not as a conqueror, but as one of them, looked at Sarah and spoke. What now? Sarah took a deep breath, looking out at the stars above. Now, she said, we show the rest of the galaxy what they've been missing. Ethan grinned. You're talking about a galactic sugar revolution, aren't you? Sarah smirked. We have a lot of work to do. Ethan sighed dramatically. Great. More running for our lives. Varen snorted. Welcome to rebellion. Ethan looked at the group around him. An ex-commander of the High Order. A group of newly awakened Azari. A rebel leader who still didn't trust him. And Sarah, the girl who started it all with a single bite. Ethan grinned. Well, he said, at least it's never boring. And with that, the sweet revolution began.